Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by David Wolman. David, it is 2:36 on a Wednesday afternoon, and we are here to talk about our reader-voted Game of the Week. First off, big thank you to everybody who went to our website, starlocalmedia.com, to vote on the 5 games we had up for consideration. I know last week we talked about, every time Saxe is on the poll that it just feels like Saxe is going to run away with it. Well, if there is another student body out there that is making a case to perhaps be the pound-for-pound king of this year's Game of the Week voting, it's Plano West.
This is how many times?
I believe this is just the second, but nevertheless, though, the 2 times that West has been on this, it's been very, very emphatic with the turnout that they've had. And sure enough, it's, they ran away with this one. This game is going to be Friday, 7 o'clock out at Neal Wilson Stadium in Flower Mound. It's Plano West against Flower Mound, one of the 2 games, only 2 games this week in District 6XA because of, COVID.
Yeah, that's a short name.
Yeah, it's so it's a game that certainly has taken on some much greater significance than we initially might have thought heading into the season in general, because you look at just the kind of the overall landscape of the district right now, and as we mentioned, there are 2 games that have been canceled for this week because you had Plano and Hebron having to cancel portions of their schedule due to COVID-19 related outbreaks within their football programs. So between those 2 schools missing out on 2 games, and then the teams that they were supposed to play over that stretch missing out on a game as well, you have 6 teams in this district that are going to miss out on at least 1 game related to COVID-19. The only 2 teams, though, that emerged from at least this little hiccup unscathed are Plano West and Flower Mound.
Cross our fingers still.
Yeah, it's very, very fitting how that's panned out. Yes, got to cross your fingers, because it does feel like we're not going to believe it's going to happen until they're actually on the field and about to kick off at this juncture.
Exactly.
But nevertheless, though, that does sort of kind of ramp up the stakes for this game Friday out in Flower Mound, because as we're getting down near the home stretch and we start to kind of look a little bit closer at these standings as far as what needs to happen for certain teams to get in the playoffs, and you factor in how each district is going to go about determining those playoff spots. The most coveted currency in District 6XA is total number of district wins.
Not by wins and losses, but just wins.
Yeah, not winning percentage or anything like that, because Plano West and Flower Mound, they still stand a chance at completing their entire 7-game district schedule and finishing this thing out relatively unscathed, whereas the other 6 teams are guaranteed to, play no more than, in the case of Plano and Hebron, they can play no more than 5 district games. And then for Marcus, Cappell, Lewisville, and East, no more than 6 district games. So that's a significant advantage for Plano West and Flower Mound. That availability could ultimately be the difference between one team making the playoffs and another team missing. So it really does put a little bit more emphasis on this game as far as who's able to get a win here and, potentially shake up this playoff logjam we have right now.
Yeah, it's still not going to be as important as, let's say you're in a zone, what happened to Rowlett.
Yeah, it's not like anyone's season could potentially end on Friday like it happened with Rowlett last week and whatnot. So, but nevertheless, there's still a big game as far as climbing up that pecking order in District 6XA. And 2 teams that I think have a fairly similar stylistic profile in some ways. So let's just kind of talk a bit about just kind of how both these teams have sized up to this point, and just kind of how we got to this game Friday out at Neal Wilson Stadium. Let's start with Plano West. One of the nice little surprise stories in the area this season. Plano West has been a resurgent year for Plano West. They're 4-3 overall, 2-2 in district play. Their offense averaging 24.3 points per game, defense allowing 22.4. They started off the year 2-1, got that emphatic start to the year, shutting out Wiley 28-0. They beat North Mesquite, then had a bit of a hiccup in the second half against Little Elm, and then as district play has gone on, they've kind of alternated wins and losses. They had the big signature win against Lewisville to kick things off, 27-17. You saw them in their game against Cappell, which was a Game of the Week selection. That game, they actually were in fairly decent shape, and then that one kind of got away from them in the fourth quarter. Then they respond the following week, and they beat Plano East, and then last week they lost to Marcus. But nevertheless, though, still firmly entrenched in the playoff mix. I believe technically in 5th place, albeit 1 half game back from 3 teams that didn't play last week, and Tabor and Cappell and Lewisville. With Plano East, it's a team that kind of prides itself on the run game.
Plano West?
Yeah, Plano West. Yeah, I'm sorry, did I say Plano East?
Yeah. Plano East.
Oh, Plano East. Plano East runs the ball a lot, too.
You're a Plano East grad, so, it naturally just hits home.
So with Plano West, yeah, they entered the year, kind of ready to hitch their wagon on offense to running back Tabor and Yates. He really, really came on strong for them over the back half of last season. And you kind of saw that early in the year as a bit of a bell cow approach to how they were distributing his carries. He had over 20 carries in their wins over Wiley and North Mesquite. But then in that first district game against Lewisville, right before halftime, he injured his quad. And he's kind of been in and out of the lineup ever since. So whereas you'd think at the surface, okay, that takes away a really central piece of Plano West's identity. They've actually unearthed a bit of a gem for their future now in sophomore Dermot White, who he looks like a really key piece as to what West might have going forward, and he's held up really well in the times that he's been able to get some serious carries. He's averaging over 5.5 yards per carry. He's just a sophomore going against some pretty solid defenses too. So Dermot White has kind of kept that run game afloat. It is a shame because the last time I got to see West was in that game against Plano East, and Yates was actually back for that game, so you got to see them both. And it's kind of a shame because Yates then he re-aggravated the injury, and then had to miss the second half of that game. But just to see the way that West was able to work those two running backs in as a bit of a tandem in the first half, and just what it meant as far as being able to keep that backfield fresh and just how effective that could be. In the first half they just ran through Plano East, and a lot of it centered on the job that they were able to do, just balancing those two running backs. And then you had the other element of quarterback Vance Fauerbacher, who's actually the backup. He actually got the start in that game though against Plano East, and it just the strength of their run game was really, really on display, and it looked like the kind of identity that you could really see this team kind of riding to the finish line. But then again, Yates got hurt, so he missed the game last week against Marcus. But again, if he's able to go on Friday, then it would be a really big boost as far as their ability just to keep both running backs fresh and firing on all cylinders for all four quarters. Greg Drawn did come back last week. He missed the East game due to an injury. He did have his first 2-interception game of the season. He's been very efficient with the ball up to this point. He'd only thrown 2 picks all year beforehand, and West, when you look at kind of the way that they operate, again, it's an offense that prides itself on the run, prides itself on working the clock, winning time of possession, and you got to be efficient in that respect. So it's not an offense that can afford multiple turnovers and whatnot. So that kind of helped things get a bit off kilter there against Marcus. Defensively, though, they've been pretty steady all season. They started off the year with that big shutout of Wiley, and then up until Marcus. Marcus is really the only team that's had any modicum of success consistently moving the ball on them. And even then, as we're looking over, they actually had some success against them early on.
Yeah. Garrett Nussmeier, the LSU pledge for Marcus, he can do whatever he wants to.
Yeah, he's tough.
He's tough. Even if you're going to send 3 defenders at him and it looks like a sack for a lot of teams, he's either going to take off for a 15-yard run or else throw for like a long touchdown between 3 defenders there. As I saw in the Cappell game where I think it was during the second quarter, he was flushed to his left and then he just took off and boom. First down right there, 3rd and 16, got 20 yards out of it.
Like it's nothing.
Yeah, but last week against Plano West, the West defense, they actually held them to 2 straight 3-and-outs to start the game right there. On one of those possessions right there, Nussmeier actually got sacked twice by Mansour Ahmad, and that actually allowed Plano West to get a short field because Marcus was pinned in deep in its own end right there. So that allowed Plano West to not be, not have to go too far. And then that led to Dermot White, the sophomore breakout running back that we're seeing right there. He gave him a 7-0 lead right there with the dive up the middle. And although Marcus, they started to, take control, towards the end of the first quarter, started to, get things figured out. Plano West just shows that even against Marcus, it's able to hold its own for a while.
It's a very senior-laden unit for Plano West on that defensive side of the ball. 10 of their top 11 tacklers are seniors. Tyler Harrell, Jacob Stevens being 2 of the most prominent. Stevens is kind of the centerpiece of the unit, linebacker, committed to Lamar, and he's been really, really solid. He entered the Marcus game last week, second on the team in tackles and first in sacks. The only player, again, mentioned it's just nothing but seniors that are leading the way there on defense. The one guy, though, who has worked into the mix as far as one of their top defensive performers who's not a senior is sophomore Vance Feuerbacher, who I mentioned earlier, she played quarterback, a couple weeks ago. He does a little bit of everything for them. He contributes in all three phases. He's backup quarterback, plays in the secondary on defense, and he's their punter. Lots of
kind of reminds you of that kid at Frisco Liberty.
Yes, Liberty, or who's it? Reedy, I think you might be thinking of.
It's Liberty.
Oh, okay.
Because remember,
we had a guy. This is actually before you got here. There was a guy at Reedy named Will Harbor who was key for our all-area team. We have a utility player of the year, and Will Harbor had actually won it in the past, and he kind of had that same sort of role, except he was a linebacker, not a defensive back, but he did a lot of contributions in all three phases for Reedy and whatnot.
Okay, but getting back to this game.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sorry, guys.
No, but nevertheless, though, it's a senior-heavy unit, though, for Plano West on defense. Feuerbacher's really, really stood out, though, as far as a piece that's going to be part of their future in whatever capacity. It sounds like they can just use him all over the place.
Yeah.
But then, you've got some strength up front with Cole Frederick, Kate Hathaway, Josiah Shelley, just a bunch of they can really, really put the heat on you on that defensive front. And it's really showed, like I said, against Marcus was really the only team that's been able to find a way to consistently score on them. They had obviously had that big statement earlier on in the season, and when they shut down Lewisville, held them to just 17 points against Plano East. Plano East had Plano East needed to score. I think it was something like they were up like 24 points. I think in the fourth quarter before East made a huge comeback, but they did a really good job subduing that East attack. It's been a solid unit. With Flower Mound, on the other hand, Flower Mound's been up until last week. You thought you had Flower Mound figured out, and then that East game just completely turned things for them on its axis. So Flower Mound on the year is 3-4 overall, just 1-3 in district play. The offense, here's a fun fact for you, David. They've scored just as many points on the season as Plano West has, 170 points. So it's a fun fact you can use at parties down the road.
Interesting, yeah, yeah.
So so Flower Mound's offense averaging 24.3 points per game. The defense allowing 26.8, and that number is a little inflated because there are two times, as you were looking at, David, when they just got absolutely hammered by Marcus and they got hammered by Lewisville. But outside of that, though, they've held up. They've held up fairly well.
Yeah, they earlier this season. They're playing state-ranked Mansfield Timberview, and the defense, they kept them in that game. I think it was an 18-13 game.
It was, yes.
And Timberview, I've covered them before when I was freelancing for the Star Telegram, and they could just run up and down the field on you. Really? With their running backs and just their offensive line, but that's a good, even though it's a loss, it's a feel-good moment heading towards district play with allowing just 18 points to a Timberview team that's always, has some good talent at its skill positions. And then obviously, fast forward to a couple weeks later, the 3 overtime game against Hebron.
Yeah.
It was it's kind of crazy. Like you see a 3 overtime game. Like how often do you see a score that's 25-20 in 3 overtimes?
Yeah, you expect that to be a little bit closer, like the 40s and the 50s and whatnot.
But that's still it's a credit to their defense. Even I think it's a time when even Hebron had its some backups in there because of injury situation right there. I think Weston Conaway wasn't playing at that time, so I think they had their backup quarterback in, and still to even and we've seen what their backups have been able to do.
Oh yeah, it's still a good team.
That's still a good team. Like you saw them against Eaton earlier this year, and obviously they can they have some good depth on that team. They're going to be a team that's going to be in the mix for playoffs to keep it close to Hebron right there. It shows that they can hang with just about anybody.
Yeah, for Flower Mound, their defense. Like I said, the numbers are inflated because they gave up a combined 105 points to Marcus and Lewisville. Yep. In the other 5 games, though, they're allowing just 16.2 points per game. And all 5 of those opponents, they've held them all to 21 points or less in regulation. Worth noting there. So the defense has been, again, it's been steady. They got a lot of talent in that front 7. Obviously up front with SMU commit Stone Eby, plus Colton Votney, Landon Colby, and Ryan Lukash at linebacker. And then in the secondary, Ryan McDavid and Christian Clatterbaugh Coppell have made some big plays for them as well. So pretty much unless they're playing Marcus or Lewisville, who are, objectively two of the, 10, 15 best offenses in the area, they fared well. And like when you look at this matchup, Plano West fits the profile more so of the teams that Flower Mound's defense has held up well against. So that's something that should at least work in their favor. It's not an offense that's just going to light you up and down the field like they'd seen with the Marauders.
Very methodical offense.
Yeah, and the Farmers. But obviously, though, when you look at just kind of the way last week kind of impacted the narrative coming into this one, it's not about the defense of Flower Mound. It's about that offense, because that side of the ball had its coming out party, and man, did they break out last week against Plano East. Heading into that East game, they had only averaged about 17.8 points per game. So naturally, that means they're going to score 63 points on Plano East. Just such a...
they were just waiting to let it out at some point.
Yeah, I mean, making up for lost time.
Yeah.
They were just absolutely emphatic in their performance against East. 625 yards of offense, 39 first downs. So they were just constantly moving the chains. It wasn't just big play one after another. It was just honestly like death by 1,000 cuts, so to speak, because they had a 77-44 advantage in offensive snaps. They averaged, about 8 yards per play, but within that 625 yards, 456 through the air, 169 on the ground. You look at, obviously, behind center, Nick Evers, who came into the season with a bit of fanfare. He's had some Division I interest that he's generated, but before even making his first ever varsity start. So there are expectations for this quarterback at Flower Mound, and he had his best game of the season by a mile. He had 452 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, only 6 incompletions, an average of 12.2 yards per pass. He was, clicking with Parker Clark all night long in this game. 12 catches, 234 yards, 3 touchdowns. Cade Edline, another junior receiver for Flower Mound, he had 10 catches for 117 and the touchdown. Their running game, Peyton Porter's kind of taken over the mantle as their lead running back, and he was effective in that game. 18 carries, 96 yards, and 3 touchdowns. The big thing that stuck out in just kind of going back over the highlights of the Flower Mound East game was, everything with Flower Mound's offense is predicated on tempo. They work a very, very effective quick game, and that was kind of the thing that stood out is how a lot of Evers' best throws downfield, there was really no wasted movement. Everything was just so precise and decisive in how he operated. He dropped back, knew exactly where he wanted to go, let it rip, and put it right on the target. There was really, there was never any sort of hesitation on where Flower Mound was supposed to go with that play, and it was executed to perfection, just about. 63 points for that offense, given what they had done for the first couple months of the season. That's a bit of a statement there at the expense of Plano East. Now, obviously, it helps that that normally means that your first read was typically open every time you were looking downfield. So the onus then falls now on Plano West to try to knock that off course and at least try to knock Evers off his rhythm a bit and really kind of to make him kind of think.
That's what I've heard about. The Plano West game. This is where maybe they can have an advantage. Is that the game against Lewisville? From what I was hearing, is that Taylor Green, the standout quarterback for Lewisville, he was having to make several reads before he was able to throw the ball.
Oh yeah, he was. They just marched on them that first drive. Lewisville did. They got out to a quick lead, but then after that, Plano West secondary did a really good job adjusting, and they just kind of dropped a lot of guys back into coverage, and it really kind of threw off the timing that Lewisville's offense likes to operate with. Now, Flower Mound is a little bit more of the tempo is a little bit different with Flower Mound, so they'll obviously throw different looks at you than what Lewisville did. But yes, Taylor Green is. If Garrett Nussmeier's obviously he's the best quarterback in the district, but Taylor Green not that far behind. No. And they just had him. He would get outside the pocket, he'd be scrambling open, and just nothing ever materialized. Plano West's defense can offer up a bit more resistance than Plano East. I think at least on paper in this one. But that kind of as we kind of then segue to talking about some of the big storylines for this game, and that's kind of the big thing now is okay, Flower Mound, you did it against a Plano East team that's taking its lumps this season. So have they in fact turned a corner? Because if they have, then this game is going to be interesting to see what Flower Mound does during this home stretch. But like I said, they hadn't scored more than 21 points all season long leading up to this East game. The 63 points they scored against Plano East, I mentioned earlier that they had scored just as many points on the season, 170, as Plano West had. you do some quick math. So those 63 points, that accounts for 37% of their total points scored this season.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Just in one game is 37%.
One game. So, yeah, this one was, you look at just the way that the offense had been trending, and it does, at the surface, it looks like a bit of an anomaly. So now we get to see, okay, can you do this again versus a more established defense, certainly one of the better defenses in 6-6A. It's, but like you said on Monday's podcast, though, Flower Mound's offense is young. They've been young all season long. They only returned 2 starters from last season, so it could very well be a case of just a young offense really starting to find find a sense of confidence and timing and rhythm, and really starting to kind of play to the expectations that they had earlier in the season. It just took a little bit of time for them to get going.
When you lose a quarterback like Blake Short.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he was district offensive MVP last year.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and led him to their first ever playoff win last year. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not easy to do.
It's not, no.
And especially with all the COVID stuff that happened this summer, even though they got to see some, more time together than like Cappell, which is in Dallas County because of all the health restrictions. They still had a month or two away. Like they didn't even have spring ball together. Mm-hmm. So I mean, for teams like that are having to insert so many new pieces right there, that's tough for them. And this might be the case where it's taking this long just because of all the COVID stuff earlier in the year.
And then on the other end, you look at Plano West, and I'm just curious, can they get back to playing games on their terms? They've done a really good job at that this season, keeping games within their comfort zone. Marcus was really the only team to break that mold, but Marcus is Marcus, and they're going to do that to everybody in this district, unfortunately. So it's not a team that's had to play from behind all too often. How's this for a weird stat? That game against Marcus, that's the first time that Plano West has trailed at halftime all season long.
Really?
Yeah, even in their losses to Little Elm and to Cappell, they were still up at half.
Yeah, I remember the game at Cappell. Yes.
So I mean, is this going to be an opportunity for them to get back to the form that they're accustomed to, establish that run game behind Dermot White and maybe Tabor Yates? Can they excel in those third and medium, third and long situations with Greg Drawn that have been oh so pivotal to them? Being able to keep burning clock, moving chains, and keeping the opposing offense kind of shackled at the sidelines. They like to work those long grinding drives, and that have cratered many an opponent. And I'm just curious to see if they can kind of get back to that after a week where a team, for the first time all season, really forced them, to do some stuff that they just weren't entirely comfortable with. So ultimately, where do we stand on a prediction for this game? How about you, David? Where are you leaning?
I am going to lean with Plano West.
Okay.
And just because you take it the Lewisville game. West won 27-17, I think it was in that game. And the way that they're able to shut down Tabor and Yates right there, hold him. I think he had less than 200 passing yards in that game.
Talon Green, you mean?
Talon Green. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Sorry. So
Tabor and Talon are fairly similar sounding first names. So.
But my job is to get the accurate information to you people. So
we're all human.
You're all human. So Talon Green, he had less than 200 passing yards in that game, and that's an offense that's used to putting up a lot more, yardage than that with all the receivers that they got, especially Isaiah Stevens. So,
absolutely.
So, I mean, if you take a look at that game and then you take a look at the way, a Flower Mound side where they allowed 51 points in that game right there. I mean, that's kind of like on paper, like a head-to-head kind of matchup of how things went.
So common opponent thing.
Common opponent, yeah. So just based on that, I'm going to lean towards Plano West, but maybe not too much, probably like 7 points.
I think this projects to be a fairly lower scoring game
than
what we've seen out of some of these just wild shootouts in 6-6A. I mean, both defenses, I think, are strong enough to make the opposing offenses a bit uncomfortable in spots, for sure. I do put some credence, though, in Plano West's success executing, especially in the first half. Like I said, they've led at halftime in all but one game against Marcus.
Yep.
I need to see Flower Mound's offense do it again. Have a 6-game sample size of one outcome on offense, and then you have a 7th game that is so completely to the other end of the spectrum. And I got to keep it in perspective too, because it was Plano East, and Plano East they're winless on the season, and covering Plano East, I know that they've had to dig a little bit deep into their depth chart on defense, and it might not necessarily have been the defense that was lining up in week 1 of the season that Flower Mound was going against. So that might have attributed to their offensive explosion a bit as well. I just think that West is right now just playing the steadier mix of complementary football. Like I mentioned, that 63 points, that's 37% of the entire output for Flower Mound's scoring all season, whereas the Plano West, their season high in points is just 34, but they've had 5 games where they've scored at least 24 points. So you know where they're going to fall most nights. So I just kind of trust a bit more consistency from what West has shown up to this point. Again, but if Flower Mound's offense has in fact figured something out there, then this could go the other direction in a hurry. So, but nevertheless, though, just with what we've seen so far, I take Plano West as well. It's a shame that Devin's not here because Devin picked Flower Mound, and he's not even here to defend himself. So, nevertheless, though, the final ballot was 2-1. A little bit of dissension. Don't you know that's a bit of a rarity for us on the picket line. But nevertheless, though, you and I, David, siding with Plano West to get the win over Flower Mound Friday in a pretty significant game in District 6-6A. Once again, this one Friday, 7 o'clock out at Neal Wilson Stadium. Our game of the week. Hope it is in fact a good one. All right, so let's then talk about some of the other games that were up for consideration for game of the week. We got a couple games on Thursday over in Frisco that certainly carry some significant ramifications for 5-5A Division I and 7-5A Division II. David, let's talk a bit about Reedy versus Wakeland. This one is going to be Thursday, 7 o'clock out at Toyota Stadium. Reedy 3-1 in 5-5A Division I. They're in third place. Wakeland 3-3 in sixth place. We know that Lone Star and Ryan is going to be 1-2 in some fashion, but 3-4, just shrug your shoulders and see what happens this week. So these are two teams, along with Independence and the Colony, who were supposed to play this week, but
unfortunately, due to some COVID situation at the Colony, they're not going to play for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. So this obviously this game then takes on a little bit more significance for whoever's able to win this one between Reedy and Wakeland as far as getting a leg up on those other two schools. So, David, I'll defer to you on this one.
Sure.
Talk a bit about what stands out about this matchup, and ultimately, who are you predicting?
It's a very good matchup right here. I mean, these are two teams that have both had success, over the last couple of years, and get into the playoffs, especially with Reedy.
Yeah.
I mean, you took a look at the playoff run that they had 2 years ago.
For sure. It's a huge one.
Huge one, yeah. It was their first season in Division II and 5 in Class 5A, and I think they had 13 wins on the season.
13 rounds. I think that amounts to what 4 rounds deep?
4 rounds deep.
They ran into Alito, which
Alito's Alito.
But they still acquitted themselves very well that season.
But obviously, coming into the season, we're going to see how Reedy is going to make the jump back up to Division I in Class 5A, especially with all the talent that's in this district right here, 5-5A.
Yeah.
I mean, they've done pretty good. They've only had one loss this season.
Absolutely.
I mean, and they have a really good, defensive front right there. I mean, it starts with Brooks, defensive end Brooks Griffith right there. Defensive lineman Jack Jameson and Ryan Jones and Zion Washington are holding up the back end of the defense. And they on the season they're only allowing 22.6 points per game. And I remember one of the games that I think I've covered them twice this year. One of them they're playing Frisco and Heritage, and Heritage they can score a lot of points.
Absolutely.
And I remember in that game, the Heritage was driving, and then Brooks Griffith just made a couple of tackles, and it just went completely south for Heritage, and then Reedy was able to find a lot of momentum, never look back, and the defense just translated to the offensive side. The offense just got the energy, and AJ Patchett, their junior quarterback, I think he completed he only had one incompletion. He threw 7 to 8, and I think he had 4 or 5 touchdowns in that game.
He's been great this season.
He's been really good.
Yeah.
And one of the receivers is AJ Fuchs, and he had a couple of touchdowns in that game as well too. So I mean, it's an offense that whenever the receivers get open, they can put up some points. So I mean, it's not it's not as balanced as their defense, but whenever they need to make plays on offense, they'll be able to make some plays on their offense. So Chad Cole's done a really good job with this team right there. Put them in a position to obviously grab a stranglehold. Whereas Wakeland, they started the season 4-0 overall, but then they've had a little bit of tough luck lately. They've lost 3 of their last 4 games right there. Although one of them was to Ryan, and everybody's gonna have a tough time with Ryan.
Absolutely.
But even in the game against Ryan, which happened a few weeks ago, again at Toyota Stadium, which I'm going to be at this week on Thursday, they actually moved the ball a couple times here on Ryan. They had plays over 2 drives over 10 plays, and one of them they got a field goal. But I mean, field goals are not going to do it against Denton Ryan right there. So it's an offense that shows that, like, that they can be able to move the ball. They're a little bit more methodical. Peyton Lewis, who's their quarterback, he came in last year during an injury situation, and he's picked up wherever he left off at the end of last year, where he led the Wolverines to another playoff berth, which was 7 in a row, and now they're trying to go for 8 in a row. And obviously, the big piece on that offense is Jared White.
Yeah,
he's at 952 yards and 13 touchdowns this season. He's a guy that can take over games whenever you want to. So I feel like if Wakeland can make a push to get in the playoffs, they're going to rely on somebody like him to make a big stand right there. So it's a game I feel like Wakeland's got to win. Like, especially with like Independence and the Colony not playing this week, and like how we mentioned earlier in this podcast is how wins and not just wins and losses or stuff like that's going to make a big difference as far as the playoffs concerned. Like, this is a game that Wakeland's got to win, so it's going to be a really good game between both of these teams.
Who do you think is going to win?
Ooh,
take a deep breath.
I am going to take Wakeland. It's going to be a really close game, but I think the desperation is going to kick in just a little bit right there. I think that that's a team that could be able to take the ball out of AJ Padgett's hands, like chunk out first downs instead of quickly moving on offense, which is going to allow their defense to get a little bit of a rest right there. So I feel like it's going to be a close game, but I'm going to take Wakeland in this game.
I'm actually on the other end. I think I'm going Reedy. I just like the defense and the way that they've shown against some of the other, maybe not the Ryan Lone Star tier of offenses, but the job that they did against Independence and Heritage. Yeah. And I think again they've got a really, really solid, I think, advantage up front, what you mentioned with Brooks Griffith and what they've done up to this point in that side of the ball. And I just think Padgett's in such a good way right now. Mm-hmm. I think he's on such a roll, and I kind of like them to kind of keep going. I think I just like the balance a little bit better on both sides than I do for Wakeland. So I'm picking Reedy. Devin actually was also siding with Reedy, so a 2-1 ballot in favor of the Reedy Lions to beat Frisco Wakeland in a very, very pivotal matchup in 5-5A Division I. Then that same night over at Frisco ISD Memorial Stadium, you've got a meeting at 7-5A Division II that could very well be a playoff eliminator when you look at the way that the district is shaking. This one will have Lebanon Trail hosting Denison. They're tied for 4th place right now. So this obviously would be very huge for securing a potential playoff seed. With Denison, you know what you're getting with Denison. Play great defense. They're going to have that power running game with Jadarian Price and Asa Osborne. Lebanon Trail has, shown to be a little bit more dynamic with its offense, but they needed their run game to produce in a big way last week to pull away from Princeton. That was just a 5-point game entering the 4th quarter, and then they really just kind of put the boots to them there to close it out. Gregory Hatley, Parker Maui, they combined for 257 yards, ultimately got a 47-28 win. So ultimately they won that thing pretty convincingly. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, we're Denison, their defense has held up well, even in defeats to Lovejoy and Frisco. Even though they lost by 20 to Frisco last week, they did still hold Frisco to 23 points, which relative to what Frisco's capable of, that's still pretty solid. And then Lovejoy, they held them to just 10 points through 3 quarters, and then Lovejoy had to mount obviously a bit of a furious push there in the 4th to ultimately win that game. But nevertheless, though, I think they can have a bit of success there. I think they can have a bit of success there as far as just kind of moving the ball just in general and being able to slow and just be able to limit the snaps for Lebanon Trail's offense. That defense they've been known to get into some shootouts this season. Lebanon Trail's defense is allowing close to 30 points per game, and I just think that's where Denison kind of hit them a bit. So I ultimately side with Denison to win this one. And let's see, I'm looking over the ballot right now, and you and I were on the opposite end of this one again.
Well, again.
You picked Lebanon Trail in this one. Devin picked Denison. So, again, another 2-1 ballot. David going off the reservation a bit with some of these. Who knows? I'm not saying one team's favored over the other, but it's obviously some moving and shaking in the picket line this week, though. Not a lot of dissension, which is what I like.
I like when we can disagree about stuff.
Let's see then. Let's look then at our next game. This one is going to be over in District 6-6A, the other game on the 6-6A schedule this week, in addition to Plano West and Flower Mound. Let's talk a little Lewisville versus Cappell. They're both part of that little three-way tie for second place at 2-1 in district. They're tied with Hebron. Now, the commonality between all three of those teams is that none of them played last week because they were all impacted by the COVID-related shutdowns around the district. So it's not like any one team is going to be fresher than the other between Lewisville and Cappell. This game Friday, 7 o'clock out at Buddy Eccles Field. Who you got, David?
I'll be catching a little bit of heat from this run right here, from my Cappell supporters, but I'm just going to give the slight edge to Lewisville. Okay, and this is a game that it's going to be a shootout. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at both of these offenses. With the two quarterbacks that we got in this game, both of them thrown for over 1,500 yards this season, with Taylor Green and Ryan Walker, and the wide receivers that you got in this game, KJ Liggins, Anthony Black on Cappell's side, also Dylan Nelson, and then on the Isaiah Stevens, who's putting up bad numbers over there for the Farmers.
Absolutely.
The thing right here is Cappell this week, they actually they had a 1 week shutdown at the school for the high school because the whole high school shut down for COVID reasons. So I'm just I don't know how that's going to factor into them having to do practices and all that kind of stuff. And then obviously the inconsistency that I kind of worry about with Cappell as well too. They've had some halves where they've just totally lit it up, and then they've had some halves against Plano West in the first half where they trailed at halftime and they kind of struggled to stop Plano West offense at times, and then also they had a couple of turnovers in that game too, they had two turnovers which led to 10 points for Plano West in the first half, and then the other week against Marcus they only had 37 passing yards in the first half. Okay. So, I mean, just the inconsistency from Cappell just worries me a little bit too much. And I feel like this is a game also where Lewisville can be able to take advantage of maybe a couple holes on defense. Zach Stricker, I'm kind of see what his injury situation is like. He got injured on the third play against Marcus, who's one of their standout defensive cornerbacks, who's also a team captain. So I feel like that might be an advantage that they can take advantage of. So I'm going to take Lewisville in this game.
I kind of worry as the Cappell beat writer and the guy who's kind of got more of the inside scoop on what's going on.
I might have to change my beat after this week.
Than I do, but I'm going Cappell in this one. And if you had asked me the same question back before the season started, I would have favored Lewisville, but just given what I've seen out of both sides, I'm kind of going the other way on this one. I kind of, much like with Reedy Wakeland, I just kind of like the balance between offense and defense and special teams a little bit better. I like the complementary football a bit more for the Cowboys. Let's see, Devin picked Cappell as well, so a 2-1 ballot in favor of the Cowboys versus Lewisville. Can we go 5 for 5? We can't. We're all on the same page for this last game.
Darn it.
All right, so I was kind of wondering if this would get game of the week because I think, with all due respect to where the readers vote, I think this is on the short list of the most high-profile games in the area this week because it's undefeated team against undefeated team this late in the season, so it's obviously going to be a huge deal. We're sticking in 7-5A Division II and talking about the battle between Lovejoy and Frisco. It's finally here. I've been waiting for this game for some time. I'm excited for this one Friday. 7 o'clock out at Frisco ISD Memorial Stadium. You basically have super juggernaut, elite, awesome firepower offense versus lockdown, shutdown, everything down defense. 53.3 points per game for the Lovejoy offense. That is they've already scored as many points in 7 games this season as they scored in 11 games all of last season. That's how well they're playing right now on offense. That's the Chris Ross effect, man. He's just found a way to maximize that personnel in such an impressive way. R.W. Rucker's playing like a district MVP candidate. Reed Westervelt, he leads the area in receiving among 5A receivers and whatnot. I mean, they're clicking with such a fine confidence and balance on that side of the ball. They feel like no matter whether it's a pass or a run, there's no down and distance that they can't convert right now.
I think the main thing, you mentioned all the R.W. Rucker, also Isaiah Smith is somebody you should mention as well too. Their lead running back, Reed Westervelt. The main thing I saw that really helped this offense work is their offensive line.
With Trent Robinson and
line
up front.
Trent Robinson, Gage Harrison, Gavin Burkhart, Parker Braithwaite, and Dylan Bro. The game I saw him against Frisco Memorial, every play. Even if it was like a short yardage run, it was at least 4 or 5 plays. They were moving 4 or 5 plays. They were knocking Memorial off the line of scrimmage right there. So, I mean, this is the game where you're going to see how well they hold up against, a Frisco defense that has let me see, how many sacks did I put on there? Lots of sacks. Lots of sacks. 11 players with at least one sack on there.
That's some depth. Yes.
That's some depth right there.
There's 11 players on defense. I don't know if you knew that.
I did know there's 11.
It's Frisco's defense, like allowing 9 points per game up to this point.
Yeah.
No one has cleared 20 points against them. Not even Keldrick Luster and all of his superpowers. They held him to 19 when they played Liberty a few weeks back. That was really kind of the first time that you saw, oh my God, like when you saw just the video game numbers that Liberty's offense was putting up and the fact that they couldn't muster any more than 19 against Frisco. Now, obviously committing 4 turnovers, or I guess it might have been 5. Another 4 interceptions.
Yes.
But that could have been, listen, now you can counter that though with saying that, okay, well, Luster's a sophomore, so it was only a matter of time before he finally started playing like a sophomore, and what better than maybe the best defense in the state to make him do so. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Rucker, he's a senior. He's a multi-year starter, and he's been hyper efficient with the football this year, only 2 interceptions thrown up to this point. So you'd expect that on paper, maybe a bit more composure out of that Lovejoy offense. And Lovejoy's already had to work out of some adversity. They've already had a defense that slowed down that offense to the tune of, what did I say? It was 10 points they had scored on Denison through 3 quarters, and then they were able to score 21 in the 4th and wind up winning that game. Mm-hmm. They've already been able to show they can again when a team is slowing down that offense. But something's got to give up to this point. So you have 2 teams that are so far and away elite on one side of the ball, and every second that those 2 are on the field is going to be just so much fun to see who gets the upper hand. I side with Frisco, though, in this one, and very, very close, though, because I do think Lovejoy can maybe go at least a little bit above and beyond what some other offenses have done against him this season. Mm-hmm. But I believe that defense is that freaking good right now. Just the job that they've done, and I think that that run game of theirs on offense can work as a nice little complement to kind of limit Lovejoy's offensive snaps and kind of keep that offense not up to the usual count that they're used to playing with. And then you look at as far as just common opponents go, again, I do think Denison is a playoff caliber team, as evidenced by picking them earlier on. And just you look at how they both performed against Denison, whereas Lovejoy needed the big, old dramatic 4th quarter comeback to win at Denison. Mm-hmm. Frisco just kind of had their way with them. Scored 23 unanswered points, won that game 23-3. Never look back. So if that means anything, and granted, again, styles make fights, matchups matter in football, so we'll see. But I side with Frisco, just barely, though. I think this is going to be a pretty solid game.
I agree with you as well, too. I just want to see the matchups between Lovejoy's receivers and Frisco's defensive backs.
Oh, yeah, Reed Westervelt and Chase Lowry and Miles Mays and Luke Mayfield. There's just a lot of star power in those matchups.
Yeah, that's going to feel like kind of like a Pro Bowl right there.
It is.
The way that Mayfield and Lavender and Westervelt can just stretch the field right there. It's going to be interesting to see how how much success they can have against Mays and Lowry out there. Those 2 guys are combined. They have 7 interceptions on the season.
That's pretty good.
Not too bad.
Pretty good.
So I feel like just based on that, how much Lovejoy loves to push the ball downfield. If I feel it's it might kind of frustrate them a little bit. Not being able to push the ball down the field, I feel it's going to give Lovejoy a little bit of frustration right there. It's like, hey, we put up all these 50-plus points per game and all that stuff. How come we're not doing it today? So I feel like this is a game just because of that. I'm going to take Frisco.
You and I and Devin were all in unison on this one. We're all picking Frisco to pick up the win over Lovejoy and stay unbeaten in pursuit of a back-to-back district championship. Mm-hmm. So yes, that's a huge game Friday, 7:00 out at Frisco ISD Memorial Stadium. Let's see. Let's go over some of the other games that were up on the picket line this week. We'll just quickly give picks on these ones, let you know where we're leaning. Let's see. Lake Dallas versus Prosper Rock Hill. You're going to be at this game on Friday.
I will.
This was another 2-1 ballot, so more dissension. David, you and I taking Lake Dallas to win this one, and Devin taking Rock Hill to win. I believe that would be its first win of the season.
They had a chance last week.
Yeah. So let's see if they can get it done against the Falcons. But nevertheless, the picket line favors Lake Dallas in that one. McKinney North versus Sherman. This is another 2-1 ballot. So much dissension. I love it.
Oh, man. Why can't it be like this every week?
Let's see. This one was another 2-1 ballot. This time, though, in favor of McKinney North. David, you and I picking North. Devin taking Sherman. Then we have Creekview versus Fort Worth Polytechnic. Creekview picked up its first win last week, and their offense has certainly picked it up a bit. We see this as a 2-1 ballot in favor of Creekview. You and I picked Creekview again. Devin took Polytechnic. So, yeah, there's just, man, these things are going to look so weird next week.
Yeah.
And then let's see. Then we close out then with a look at a matchup over in District 9-6A between a couple Garland ISD schools. Rowlett versus Naaman Forest. Rowlett having its heart ripped out by Wiley last week, going to miss the playoffs. I guess we all foresee some sort of hangover effect on that because we all took Naaman Forest to get the win in this one. And then as we close out, West Mesquite versus Wiley East. One of these two teams looking to try to claw back into playoff contention in 7-5A Division I. We all took West Mesquite, the Wranglers, to beat the Wiley East Raiders. So that is a look as far as our picks. As far as the records for the picket line, not to say that you should buy into any one person's picks more than the others and whatnot, but just as far as where we're standing, Devin is 49-26. Not here to defend himself. You are 51-24, and I'm 58-17. Y'all got some catching up to do. Hey, this is a perfect week to do so.
That's why all the dissension.
Yeah, we are so all over the place this week. So putting a little bit of heat on y'all. I like it.
Yeah, maybe it's a make or break week for me.
So let's see. So that's kind of where we sit as far as some of the other marquee games in our coverage area. Let's close out by talking about which games we are in fact going to be covering this week. David, what is on your coverage?
Tuesday night, I'm going to be at Toyota Stadium to cover Frisco Reedy against Frisco Wakeland, and then on Friday, I'm going to be out at Falcon Stadium in Corinth to cover Prosper Rock Hill and Lake Dallas.
Awesome. And for me, I will be out at McKinney ISD Stadium Thursday, 7 o'clock. My first look at McKinney North in that aforementioned game in 7-5A Division I. They play Sherman. And then Friday, I'm going to be out at Frisco ISD Memorial Stadium for Lovejoy at Frisco. See if it lives up to the hype. Hope so. Alan Geyer kind of fell short of the hype, so I'm hoping this one makes up for it. So yes, that is a look at what we have on our coverage docket for this week. And with that, that'll do it for this episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. Podcast is going to be off next week for Thanksgiving and whatnot, so everybody enjoy the Thanksgiving holiday. We'll be back the following week to talk about, probably break down a whole lot of playoff scenarios, so we'll see what happens between now and then. Until that time, folks, take care. We will talk to y'all later.